Welcome to today's episode of High Stakes. I'm Paige Soya, and today's episode is going to be about proptech and its impacts on decarbonization, given everything that's going on in the real estate world. And we have two of our investors at K Street here who both have real estate backgrounds and can share what's kind of going on in the space right now. It's Cohn and Rich Thometz. And we have one of our portfolio company founder CEOs, Aaron Block from Allumia. So it's going to be a good discussion. And before we get into it, let's just do some quick intros. So Alan, why don't you go first?
Sure. Nice to see everyone. As Paige said, I'm in the real estate business. I have been on the private equity investing side for almost 20 years. Today, I'm one of the founding members of WMC Government Real Estate, where we focus on buying properties where the federal government is primarily our tenant in those buildings. About half are VA clinics, the other half are sort of your standard, usual government office space, all under the auspices of the lease authority of the General Services Administration of the GSA. We've got 25 buildings that we own today and about $500 million of assets under management. Before that, I worked for one of the founders of the Carlyle Group, the Pritzker investment arm Marmon Group, and the White House. So sort of a diverse background.
I'm seeing the path of how you got into this space. Yeah.
Exactly.
Very
Exactly.
cool. Yeah. Rich?
Rich Thometz here. I've had a long career in construction, real estate development. I actually worked for Weyerhaeuser Company, the tree growing company, in our real estate and home building efforts. Also was in the general counsel's office. I left and started my own firm, Haley Development, in the late 90s, a few decades ago. And then I branched off and started a contracting company, Efficient Home, that mass produces energy efficiency retrofits. We work with a lot of the regional mid-Atlantic utilities and housing agencies under different programs for mass producing energy efficiency, one home at a time or one apartment complex at a time. And I also am part of the burn break companies. We own a portfolio of commercial real estate properties.
Cool. Thanks, Rich. Aaron?
Yeah, Aaron Block, CEO and founder of Allumia. And Allumia makes sort of a software and services platform that's ideally designed to make it very, very easy to bring decarbonization solutions to the mass market commercial industrial customer. We can get into that a little bit more later, but sort of try to target underserved market spaces. We largely also work with utilities and other large sort of aggregators of buildings and customer relationships. Before starting Allumia back in 2014, actually co-founded a solar water heating as a service company with one of K Street's investors, Zach Axelrod. Grew that up at one point to be, I believe, the largest developer of commercial solar water heating in the country, which you pick a small enough pond, you can get the biggest fish. And that's basically a puddle, not even a pond. And before that, got my start right out of college in smart grid at GridPoint. So also have a DC area background, although I'm now in Seattle.
Well, lots of, I think, long-tailed history for all of you in this space, which is super interesting. Maybe we can just start I like to start this off with basics. So like, what is proptech? And I'll just say what it is to me when we invest in it, but feel free to share your thoughts if you'd like. And to me, it's basically technology for the built world. So anything for commercial, residential, or otherwise, anything that's built, it's software and technology that improves efficiency for those types of buildings or in the built world. And that can be SaaS, it can be sensors, it can be a combination of those two things. I mean, we see tons of stuff in the space. I think the most obvious ones that people know are probably things like Zillow. There's actually a big intersection with fintech. So there's a lot of payment apps and tenant billing software and things like that. That's the world of proptech that we play in. And I guess maybe, do you want to, Rich and Alan, maybe it's worth just sharing what's going on in the real estate space right now, generally.
Perspective, from sort of an investor perspective, as opposed to maybe the construction side. So interest rates obviously have a huge impact on the investor world. And there is still a pretty big chasm between folks who have properties that they'd like to sell and what it will take to buy them. Most of that world is run by cap rates. And if folks don't know what cap rates are, it's a methodology by valuing buildings based on cash flow. And it's the currency by which people buy and sell. So At the moment, sellers don't have true religion on what things are worth, and buyers don't know what to pay because everyday rates go up. And rates are the primary driving function of how you value the thing you're going to buy. And so there's a lot. The good news is the debt markets are not frozen. The bad news is nobody knows what to pay for anything, so they're not buying anything. So in effect, they're frozen. And that's, until we stop seeing the everyday jump up in the 10-year treasury bond, there's no top as to where they'll stop. And so therefore there's no market to buy anything. And sellers don't quite know what to sell at because they still haven't quite figured out that whole world and pricing has changed. Rich, do you see it any differently?
No, I see it. I see it from our commercial real estate portfolio side, just like Alan outlined. What's interesting for me is on the aggregation side of energy efficiency improvements, there's increasing pressure on looking at the operating expenses to analyze and optimize. The base currency for us is energy efficiency. I always say you do the mental math. We can analyze it a million software systems to someday, whether it's cutting power bills or decarbonizing. It's the same end game when you retrofit 2 or 3,000 homes every calendar year. But there's increasing pressure we're seeing on landlords to figure out how to compress their operating expenses without significantly increasing their capex. And so a major contributor to that is utility and government programs that can help bridge that gap. And we're seeing a curve increase that's pretty dramatic in the last 6 months on that. That's applying to it. And it's driven by interest rates, and the gap between buy sell and the freeze up in that market is putting more pressure on operating expenses, which we think is more pressure on energy efficiency type improvements that are cost effective, which is leading to the practical level of decarbonization. It's a question then how it's measured and the systems for measuring and analyzing building performance before and after the fact.
Yeah. I mean, I will say, like, what is it? 40% of energy consumed is by buildings, is by the built world. So it's a huge area for decarbonization. It's a super, super hard problem to solve. But like, Aaron, I would love to maybe share your perspective on it, having been doing it for so many years, and just what you're seeing in the market in that process.
I don't know if I've been doing it longer than these guys. It seems like we've got quite a wealth of experience. But yeah, I think, starting just rolling back a step to talk about prop tech and how it applies to decarbonization is, in light of what Alan or Rich said, I think really interesting because prop tech is such a wide and expansive space. Allumia obviously is focused very much on the decarbonization side of prop tech. But when you look at the operational expenses of facilities, when you look at buildings, the built environment might consume somewhere from 30 to 40% of all energy consumed in the US, or at least all electric and gas, all primary or secondary fuels. But when you look at the operating expenses of buildings, there's sort of, what is referred to as the 333 rule, which is that in operating a building, for every square foot that you have every year, you'll spend roughly on the order of $300 on headcount and payroll overhead, $30 on rent, and $3 on energy and utilities. And so you just look at that and you're, the smallest by 1 or 2 orders of magnitude relative to everything else. And it's a question of, and this is where I think PropTech gets really interesting. How do you make it really, really simple, really, really easy for people to take advantage of decarbonization? Because when you are looking into optimizing OpEx, it's just can be such a drop in the bucket. And what are the ways that we can get building owners to take advantage of decarbonization opportunities? Is it by boosting the top line revenue because, having a cleaner, more sustainable building is something that you can rent out at a higher rate? Or is it saying, yeah, we're going to reduce the smallest of your 3 overheads per square foot, but we're going to do it in the simplest, easiest way possible? And then also, getting back to cap rates, if you can do it in a way that doesn't trigger a massive capital expense up front, I don't know what cap rates are now, but the last time Allumia got involved working with REITs that were sort of looking to do energy efficiency improvements and flip properties, I think it was, a cap rate of 10. So we could save them $100,000 a year that translated to an additional $1 million that they could sell the property for. And so what Illumia is really focused on, you'll allow me to monologue for just a second longer, is sort of creating the tools both for ourselves and for our utility partners, who sounds like Rich also works with, to make it really, really easy for building owners to opt into sustainability, to opt into decarbonization. We do it through a method that we call decarbonization as a service. And so these utilities or municipalities or franchisors or REITs can go to their properties and say, look, Burger King, you're really good at flipping hamburgers. Foot Locker, you're really good at selling shoes. Hickory School District, you're really good at teaching students. None of you are really good at figuring out what the right decarbonization measures are. That's just not what your ballot is. But I'm your utility. I'm your trusted energy expert. I'm Duke Energy. I know everything there is to know about generating, transmitting, distributing energy. And frankly, I probably know more about the right ways to consume it efficiently. So rather than me just saying, hey, there's a rebate out there, if you figure out the right energy efficiency upgrades for your facility, I'll give you a rebate check, which is the old way of building decarbonization from the utility standpoint. We sort of give them the tools so Duke can go to their customers or AEP can go to their customers and say, hey, I'm your trusted energy expert. I'm going to identify the opportunities. I'm going to design the upgrades. I'm going to bring in the local contractors to do the work, and I'll fund it. And getting to Rich's question about how do you measure the sort of upgrades, I'm actually going to provide revenue grade metering that goes at the device or at the circuit level. So I can measure in real time, every minute of every day, how much energy these systems are consuming, how much energy they're saving, and I'll just bill you for a portion of the saving. And so the idea there is that you're taking all of the need for expertise and risk mitigation out of the hands of the people who don't have that expertise, who don't have that knowledge, which are the small and medium-sized business owners, and you're putting it in the hands of trusted experts who are the utilities.
That's great. I think there's actually kind of a lot of overlap in that and what you've been involved in, Rich.
Yeah, I was just thinking, we're working in the Baltimore region with the Green and Healthy Homes Initiative on doing decarbonization and electrification on limited income homes, where we're removing all their combustion appliances, placing with clean electric heat pumps, water heaters, convention ranges, stoves. And I can't remember the conference. I was in Seattle this spring and discussing the efficiency coming out of Mitsubishi and Trane on their next generation heat pumps is just staggering. And I used to, been from Idaho here. It's always said, let the performance matter. It actually has to be warm in the winter. You can't just say it'll be warm in the winter, but it is stunning, the efficiency evolution that's happening. And then the measurements of those efficiencies. We do the base measurements with Nest systems that are installed in a lot of our homes. And I'm just amazed at the simplest of things that can be installed in homes on a mass production basis that can get into their personal sensing management, and how much that combination of electrification heat pumps with smart meter systems can be installed on a mass production basis and drop the energy consumption dramatically on a decarbonization basis. To me, the interesting part, though, is I think what Aaron was mentioning on what his firm is providing. I think Arcadia is to some degree doing that, which is a suite of enterprise software systems that become a one-stop shop. We have always said that we don't want to work with just one piece of software that just provides us sensory data. I am invested in one firm that does smart systems and sensing systems for HVAC systems and preventatively know whether there's a problem involved with your heat pump or there's a water leak or something. I think that's great, a proactive sensor system. But the long term or the end game is really, how is that integrated into the rest of the modeling and systems of the house as the software rolls up on an enterprise basis and becomes a one-stop shop. And for commercial real estate, and thinking about Alan's projects and mine, I don't have enough time to go through all the different software demos and try to figure out between 50 different firms and 10 different applications, which ones might work as one-offs. I'd rather take a one solution provider. And I think that's where on proptech and decarbonization that the evolution is going to go.
I do too. We've been seeing a lot of roll up in the space, and I think that's just like it's extreme. It's such a fragmented space, and everybody says that same complaint about it. So I think we're going to see more and more of that, hopefully. Alan, I was going to ask you. I'm curious. Like, I mean, when I think about decarbonization for buildings, it seems like it's Aaron, to your point, like it's not at the top of the priority list, I think, for a lot of investors. And I wonder how like government tenants feel about it, or if they have any sort of, if they're, top down pressing you to do things like this, or if it's really not on their mind. Just trying to figure out like where do we think the ultimate, driver of this happening is going to be.
So let me, by way of using our portfolio as an example, sort of break down in three buckets, sort of the kinds of tenants we've got, right? So we've got sort of very high-end national security tenants, and we've got, that's about a third of our portfolio. About half our portfolio is VA clinics. The other half is what I would call specialized securitized space, but not necessarily that has tremendous power demands. So highly secure space, but not major power demands. So in the first two buckets, the government pays for some, but maybe not all of the electricity in those buildings. So for example, in all of our VA clinics, which are huge power hogs, right? They cover all the electricity bills. We never see them. Doesn't matter to us. While I would love to see them be more efficient for all the right reasons, from an investor's perspective, it doesn't matter to us one iota. In the national security buildings, I would say there's tremendous power going into those buildings as well. Only the common area spaces do we worry about that we pay for. They pay for all the secure space. Again, not on our need list. The third bucket is where we would find efficiencies and find value. The problem we've got is, and maybe this is just an affectation of coming through 12 years of a very aggressive, very highly priced market. It didn't matter a ton whether you reduce energy costs by 10 or 20% on all your total cash flow, because people were sort of overpaying for properties, and there was really no need to eke out the most amount of value possible, right? As cap rates have gone up and prices are coming down, everything matters. And so we're just now wrapping our heads around what to do in that third bucket. The problem we've got is that most of our buildings range from, let's say, 25,000 square feet on the small end to maybe 150,000 in that bucket. So they're not huge buildings, right? And the energy savings for us is not going to be six figures. And so we'd struggle a bunch to try to figure out if there's significant CapEx required to eke out that savings. When you're talking the tens to $50,000 of energy savings on an annualized basis, while highly valuable when cap rates are in a wildly changing environment, it's not a lot of pure dollars, right? So we struggle a little bit with that. And so we're a little different than most, because while we do have a sort of a broad portfolio, 2/3 of it's covered by the government. So doesn't really matter to us, sadly.
You want somebody else to do the work and pay for it. Have I got a solution for you?
Exactly. Exactly. On the highly securitized space, we don't even access to the panels. Like we just don't, and the units, when the rooftop units need to be fixed, we don't fix them. Like we procure a service call, but we don't, it's all, basically third party property management on our end. We don't pay for it. We don't want it. They don't want to let us touch them. So there's a lot of that in this portfolio. So we're a little different than most, I would say.
Well, I wonder, yeah, go ahead, Rich.
Well, I also wanted to interject, in the easy summer, if you will, summer season, flu and COVID's abated, everything's fine. The last 3 years, there was an intersection between efficiency, decarbonization, but the flip side was fresh air in buildings and healthy buildings. I call it was it Joe Allen from the healthy buildings movement from Harvard and MIT that were pushing that. And it's a conflict between getting fresh air and buildings. So many buildings are half vacant, and there's this pressure to bring employees back and increase the occupancies again. Then winter will come, as it always does, and it'll have flu season, at least as it always does. And there's a need for an intersection of fresh air improvements to go with decarbonization, and they overlap. And they need to be modeled concurrently on how to do that. I watch all these old buildings I'm reading about that are emptying out, and are they eligible for conversions? Do they have the right floor plates to convert to residential from office? And just as important as the floor plate is the systems and the types of systems, and can you get fresh air in that building for residential use and going into the colder seasons in places like the Northeast or Seattle. So I just wanted to interject that
We
that's
did
another
we did
subset of
one
prop tech.
yeah, we did one residential conversion like that from office to residential in Baltimore. So 400 multifamily units. And the only reason we did it, because it's not really germane to what we normally would do, was all the systems were brand new. And so they were all latest and greatest filtering. And this was just happened to be pre-COVID, so that was helpful, but more confluence than construct. And the floor plates ran with the mechanicals in the proper methodology in the building, so that offices could be converted into residential units. So I wouldn't. It's a hard thing to do. It's a
You
long
did.
idea because there's lots of empty office space, but those two elements have to be lined up, or the capex just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I also wonder, I mean, just in general, I think we've all been sort of like waiting and waiting for this moment of inflection with decarbonization. It seems like it should have happened yesterday, but here we are like 10 years later, and it's still a very big, huge challenge, especially in the prop tech world and in the built world. And I'm curious what all of your beliefs are around what is the thing that will cause that inflection point to happen. Like in your case, it seems like, Aaron, the belief is that consumers are driving it really, because the tenants themselves are the ones that will make these choices more readily, versus versus the portfolio managers who, unless the LPs are putting pressure on them to decarbonize their own portfolio of buildings, they're probably not super focused on it, is what it seems like still today.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got a blend of tenant-driven improvements and landlord-driven improvements, and certain types of landlords certainly are easier, and certain types of tenants are easier. I'm familiar with what Alan was talking about with government properties. We've got a Navy facility that we did, and we're working on an IRS facility, and having, to Rich's point about measurement, putting in sensors and meters in government buildings is, can be a fraught process. And so people move at different speeds. I wish I knew what was going to like drive the turning point in decarbonization. I do feel like, we've been saying it was upon us at least since 2008. And I'm starting to think that it is more, we're in the midst of it now. One of my board members is constantly asking why this isn't more like the cell phone revolution. And it's just all of the complexities of the involved systems of buildings, but also like the interconnected systems of utilities and politics and humans just makes this a slower evolution. I don't think that there's a switch that flips. I think we're picking up speed. We're on the curve, and at some point we'll look back and say, "Oh, we're now on that, very much upward inflection." But it's slowly coming upon us. It is not going to be a 90-degree turn.
I would posit that if you using that benchmark to use as 2008 up until, let's say, the last 6 months, there's been really, and while there's been interest and desire, there's been no tremendous need to figure out how to eke every last dollar out to generate enough net operating income to pump up values, because cap rates have been falling forever for the last 12 years, 13
Yeah.
years. And so, yeah, level of money on the table, fine. But if I have the trade off between doing some capex, which is 2 or 3x the value I would get by lowering my utility costs, I'm not going to do it. But in today's world, where I'm eking out as much net operating income as I can at, and the trade-off being, if someone else can help me figure out the capex, great, because I'm not going to get the same price for my building as I got a year ago or 10 years ago. And that's where I think that's why you'll see the inflection. Part of the problem is the market just hasn't needed it. And now it needs it because they're seeking out all the ways they can maximize revenue.
Yeah, I feel like it's a great point.
Yeah.
It's a really great point.
I'm excited for the continuing evolution, again, driven by heat pumps and smart sensors, for driving utility-based incentive programs to reach out to the masses. I do believe that inflection point is coming upon us with that combination alone, in residential structures and in retrofits with multifamily structures. So I think we're going to see a significant increase in those installations where they've been an incremental part of the market, and where they're going to become fundamental as systems turn over.
Yeah, I think Aaron, you're kind of seeing that with your own business and the way that I think you're planning to expand from here.
Yeah, I think electrification is a huge piece, both electrification of mobility, but also electrification of buildings and heating. I think that seems to be coming a little bit faster on the residential side than it is quite as much on the commercial side. I think the commercial side always gets a little bit left behind, particularly the sort of smaller footprint buildings that Alan was alluding to, university systems and Amazon and Google, they get all of the good attention, and so they can do a little bit more work. I think there's still a fight to be fought on sort of the mid-sized commercial building. And I think, one of the things that I'm excited about is getting sort of more institutional buy-in, not just from the people who are receiving that upgrade, but from the provider network.
Well, we're coming up on time. Any final thoughts here? Well, thank you, Aaron, and thank you, everybody.